welcome everyone to Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. My name is Nina Joshi, and I am very excited about our guest today. Today, we will be bringing on Rita McGrath, author and professor at Columbia Business School. As you know, on Women's Health Tech Wednesdays, we love questions. So if you have any, please feel free to add them to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and I will make sure we get to it towards the end of our conversation. And so with that, we'd like to formally bring on our guest today. Rita, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. How nice to see you.
Awesome.
See you.
Yep, as close as we can in this virtual world, but so excited that you're here today. And would love to just, learn a little bit more about you. You have such an amazing career, from author to founder to professor. Would love if you could just share with us, who is Rita McGrath and where did her journey begin?
Oh, well, thank you very much. So I guess it starts with my parents, who were both scientists. They emigrated from Germany. Mm-hmm. And I was born when they were on the faculty of the Yale Medical School. So wow. Yeah, I always grew up, lots of books. Arguments at the kitchen table were always resolved by somebody going and diving into some reference books. So I guess the academic part kind of goes back to that. So professionally, I was very interested in public policy. So I have a degree in public policy and spent the first chunk of my career as a City of New York official. And the project that we were doing then, ironically, is what today we would call it digital transformation, but it was the very first effort to really digitize the procurement operations of the City of New York. And that got me interested in large-scale organizational change. So some years later, I decided to go get my PhD and ended up at the Entrepreneurial Center at the Wharton School. And I said to my supervisor, I said, well, I'm really interested in studying the science of implementation, large-scale organizational change. And he looked at me and he said, I can't think of anything more boring than the science of implementation. And as it happened, we got a big grant from Citigroup, which was what they were called at the time, to do a 3-year study of their corporate venturing program. And so it really neatly dovetailed my interest in change and transformation and his interest in entrepreneurship and doing new things. And so that's really where the corporate innovation focus came from.
Wow. What an illustrious background. Before we kind of get in, because there's just so much I want to learn from you when it comes to all of these different aspects of your career, but I first have to ask, how do you prioritize self-care and just leisure in a very, it seems like the work that you're doing is very impactful, very important, and probably very time consuming. So would love to learn, how do you prioritize kind of moments of rest during, busy days?
Well, it's important. I think it's really important. So I have a coach, a physical coach, that I'm pretty religious about regular workouts. So that's very important to me. So that's right at the top of the list. Other things, kind of slide down. My husband is very good at sort of saying it's time now to take a time out, slow down, and then let's do things. So you're right, though. I think one of the things that's happened in the pandemic is we've lost our boundaries. And I learned this the hard way. Really, I was back teaching in person at Columbia for the first time in 2 years. And it's like I totally forgot the fact that I'm on a train for an hour means that's an hour I can't be doing other things. And so I think there's a need to kind of readjust our expectations of ourselves now that we are trying to make space for other things in our lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we could definitely, touch on that a little bit later, but just this idea of, I think having the pandemic really, I think for me has really kind of allowed myself to question, what are my priorities and have I been dedicating the time that I need to for these other, moments in my life beyond just work. So,
well, and, so here's a little dilemma I'm staring at right at the minute. So during the pandemic, I was saying, I can't believe that we all would fly off to India, for a 3-hour workshop. We, meaning me and my colleagues, people like us, for a 3-hour workshop, or go to Singapore for a 2-day. I was like, I can't believe we did that. Well, here I am right now with an invitation to go to Australia. Wow. I'm looking at it going, do I really want to do this? Because I know what's involved. It's 22 hours on a plane, and then you're sort of, glossy-eyed for days on end, and then you got to recover when you come back. And I say to myself, wow, but the client really wants an in-person experience. And so I think we're all going to be wrestling with these kinds of decisions going forward.
Absolutely. It's like, how do you balance, the benefits of being able to actually have these in-person, conversations and community versus, the need for time and space, and just being able to also have some moments of rest too. So that will be the question. That will be the question that we'll have to ask ourselves.
Check back in a couple of weeks and I'll let you know the answer.
Yeah, exactly. Keep us posted. I would love to learn a little bit more kind of about, the founder side of Rita. I know you founded Belize in 2016, and this is a company that is all about strategic insights and guiding to provide solutions. What was that journey to creating the company? What was, the catalyst for it? Would love if you could just share your founder story with us.
Sure. So, well, for many years, as you know, I give speeches and I teach and I write books, and that was all great, and it has its place. But what I was getting frustrated by, I think, was, so, I wrote probably one of the articles that I'm best known for in 1995. It was published in the Harvard Business Review, and here we are all these years later, and I see companies and people making the same mistakes, making the same errors of judgment, not planning appropriately. And it occurred to me that for my ideas to really have impact without just being, oh, that was fun, that was great, but to really change the way organizations operate, more was going to be needed. And so I set up Belize initially as a tools company. And the idea would be kind of simple, right? Downloadable surveys or spreadsheets that you could play around with or so forth. And over the years, it's evolved. And so where we are now with Belize is 3 offerings. One is an advisory offering. So you can sign up for, we recommend 12-month program to get your innovation governance organized, to figure out how you're managing your portfolio, to do things like plan to milestones, to assess the strategic fit of stuff. So there's a bit of advisory that's necessary, but it's not, don't think of it as traditional consulting art. My goal is to empower people. So like I am successful when we kiss each other goodbye and then we get together for lunch now and again. So I don't need to keep feeding the beast, right? I mean, I'm not that kind of consultancy. Then we have something I'm super excited about, which is called the Spark Hub system. It's a software spine that that you think of it like a GPS for your innovation efforts. So it's not going to tell you how to turn the steering wheel, but what it does do is it say, okay, when you get to the next corner, here might be the next thing you want to do. So it's sort of filling that gap in between idea management software, of which there's a ton, and project management software. It's that bit in the middle that companies so often get stuck with. Absolutely. And then the third piece of our stool is we've developed some learning modules. And the vision for that is, okay, this is great. Now I know how to govern. I've got my software set up, but now I need 100 people to know how to do a customer interview. Well, the vision for that is, let's hop over to the learning modules, and in your own time remotely, you can pick up that knowledge, right? And go back to your team and take the next step. So it's up, it's running. It's been quite the journey. So as a founder, you never know what's going to come next. And of course, the teams change. I'm probably on my 4th software provider right now, but the vision has remained pretty consistent from the founding.
That's incredible. And I love that it's just, this is your bread and butter. It's just taking all the knowledge that you have and just, democratizing it, making it as accessible as possible, which I think is really important. As a founder, would love if you could share, have there been any lessons learned, any challenges that you've had to face, navigating, what it means to just have a company?
Oh, it's a big challenge. And you run into all the issues around money and equity and who's got an interest. And I've had multiple partners throughout the journey so far. And you run into conflict when people see there's a big opportunity there. And so navigating that hasn't always been easy. I think any founder will tell you this, don't put off the difficult conversations, have them as early as you can, right? Not fun. That's not the fun part of the job.
Right.
I think another thing is be prepared to resource before you have to. I think what happens to a lot of founders is, they're so careful about their money that they end up over their heads. And so by the time they bring on help, you're already 6 feet underwater, and now you're in kind of a flailing crisis. So as an example, when we were preparing to launch the learning modules, I knew that we were going to need somebody to answer questions like, what's my logon? Or I can't work on my browser, or what do I call? I mean, just people are people, right? So there's and so I brought on someone who basically had to define that job. But what was great was she really had like 3 to 4 months before we actually had to have her like perform that job. So she could design it, she could figure out what workflows were needed. She could really build it before we absolutely positively had to have somebody. And I think that's hard, because money's tight and you want to be careful about spending. You don't want to let your spend accelerate beyond what revenues you're producing. But I think in the long run, you're better off if you can do that a bit.
I love that. So, have the difficult conversations. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Advice that is applicable in all aspects of life. We gotta love it.
Absolutely.
That's incredible. And so also, not in addition to being a founder, you are also a best-selling author. Tell us about, what prompted you to kind of start your literary journey? Was there, anything in specific that kind of became the catalyst where you just knew you had to put pen to paper?
Well, book projects are a fantastic opportunity to clarify your thinking over a long period of time. Books take a long time. And I think one of the mistakes I made with my first book is first book authors, the books are always like this fat because you think you've got to put every thought you ever had in the book. Yeah. And so my first book was called The Entrepreneurial Mindset. And if memory serves me, it's over 300 pages. And what I've realized since then is books for me are a way of crystallizing a set of concepts around a core theme. So, and living with it for a while and really getting deep on it because articles and short pieces they have their place for sure. Yeah. But if you really live with a book, it's like you're going to be the person in the world who knows the most about that particular thing the day it's published, right? Because you have been living with it and nobody else has. So my most recent book, which is called Seeing Around Corners, which is about strategic inflection points, really crystallized when a friend sent me this article and it was called, What If You Changed the World and Nobody Noticed? And one of the feature stories of the article was about the invention of manned flight, which is astonishing because men have wanted to fly. I mean, humankind has wanted to fly since there has been humankind. Right. And yet, when the Wright brothers accomplished this, it was considered so inconceivable, like just so completely impossible. People were literally standing on the ground in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, watching these planes flying around overhead and dismissing it. They said, must be a circus trick, must be an optical illusion. They were so unable to believe that this thing had happened. And that gave me the insight, which is that strategic inflection points, when they finally reach that critical mass, they feel as though they came out of nowhere. They feel as though, oh my God, this just happened. But when you really look at them, they've been building up usually for a long time. Sometimes a really long time. We had the Jetsons in 1962, and we're still waiting for robotic autonomous cars, right?
Wow, that's actually a very, very good point. When it comes to the work that you were doing and the actual writing of your books, what did that research phase look like? Was that something that you just kind of had all in your head that you just wanted to dispense? Were you just really curious as to what it takes to kind of get some of those things fleshed out too?
Yeah, well, a book, at least the book projects I've worked on, they go through phases, right? So there's an initial phase where I just grab tons of ideas and I have both digital and physical notebooks, and like I'll rip a magazine article out, or somebody will write me something that I think is really interesting, or I'll pick up Harvard Business Review and I'm like, ooh, what's that all about? And so that's kind of the pile of stuff. And then usually what happens is there's some kind of inciting incident that teaches me what the book's really core theme could be. So I'll take the last two of them. So I wrote a book called The End of Competitive Advantage, which is my second to last book. And the core theme there was just looking at how we study strategy. And we didn't have a lot to say for situations in which competitive advantages were short. We, the field, and it got me to thinking about, well, what would the new playbook look like if you said, more and more strategies are like making movies or putting on a political campaign or setting up a temporary organization like the Olympics, right? Like, how would you do things differently if your company looked more like that than the traditional, General Electric case study, and that was really the inciting thread that got that going. And that one was kind of interesting. I was working with a fabulous editor at Harvard Business Review, and I had written the book kind of the way my view of competitive advantage unfolds, which is
Right.
you have innovation and an insight, and then you have a ramp up process, and then you have a period of exploitation, and then you have a period of transformation because something old has now gone away and you've got to change to something new.
Mhm.
And she was reading it and she said to me, Rita, this just doesn't work. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you know, the examples are like mixed up and some of them are really dated, because if you're going to write about an innovation that happened 10 years ago, it's 10 years ago, right? She said, I really think you need to write it like the new playbook. So in that case, what had to happen, this was very interesting, was the book had kind of been written this way and now I had to go write it that way. So it wasn't that I lost a lot of what I'd been writing about or thinking, but it really had to be put into this new scaffolding. And I thought Melinda was brilliant, and it worked much better. It worked much better. So that was just fantastic. And so sometimes books, you know, the core idea didn't really change, but the way I presented it and talked about it did.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like just book writing and book projects can just seem like a very, I want to say therapeutic. I don't know if that's the right word, but just a really good way for you to just sit in your own thinking and just kind of like really understand and get deep in within yourself and how you perceive things.
I would
That's
agree.
very nice. Wow.
The thing about books, though, is you have to, you know, you have to remember this thing's like a spouse. Like you're going to be living with it forever.
Yeah.
So one of my colleagues is at Stanford. He's a guy named Bob Sutton, and he wrote a book, and pardon my French, he wrote a book literally called The No Asshole Rule. Following him, you know, for the rest of his career.
Oh, that's so funny. So yeah, so name wisely, name your books wisely, and just know that it's a process.
Oh, he doesn't mind. He's like totally cool with it.
He loves it.
That's the message out there, what the book's about.
That's incredible. Oh my gosh. So in addition to all of that, and I know you also are a professor as well, kind of what prompted you to kind of add that to your toolkit?
Well, the professor thing actually started before many of the other things.
Oh, wow.
So as I mentioned, I went to the Wharton School and I finished my degree, and people always ask me like about my job hunt, and I'm like, there's nothing replicable about my job hunt. So what happened was I'd raised the funds to do a postdoc because I finished my dissertation and thought another year would give me a chance to get some publications underfoot. I had young kids at the time, so it kind of worked with my calendar. And I had a good friend from Columbia call and say, you know, we have a strategy job this year. I know you're not really on the market, but why don't you come along and give a job talk? And I'm like, well, what have I got to lose? You know, if nothing else, it's good practice, right? So I ended up landing at Columbia, and they really needed somebody to take over that strategy course.
Oh, wow.
So that's how it was an invitation from a friend. I wasn't even really on the market.
I love it. Sometimes it just happens. It's just happenstance and it ends up working out. That's incredible. And so I know we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I mean, just given all of the different, you know, hats you've played and the depth of your career, would love to kind of get your perspective, because I know we were talking a little bit earlier about, you know, and you've mentioned inflection points a lot. And I think that, you know, we are kind of at an inflection point when it comes to what does just work look like? What does the future of work look like, especially for women? Since I know that, you know, I just remember hearing articles about just, you know, the burden, caregiver burden, all of these things that have been placed on women, especially during the pandemic. So would just love your thoughts on, you know, where do you see the future of work going, and what are some of the challenges or the areas of opportunity in all of that?
Yeah, fantastic question. I think we're all asking that, right? I think there was a report out the other day that in New York City, midtown offices, something like 28% of what they were before the pandemic. People are just, you know, people are not so interested in their crummy commutes and their cubicles with headphones on. So I think we're all really rethinking work. Let me speak to women though for a minute, because I think there are some parts of the conversation that have not come up. So absolutely the care burden has fallen disproportionately on women. And my colleagues who study this sort of thing are very articulate about the fact that we've got a whole generation of women who are, you know, really struggling to establish careers and to develop, you know, it's hard to start your career remotely. It's just really hard to do that. Now, that much being said, I think one of the things that is true that we potentially are seeing the erosion of now is what I'll call the male career cycle. And organizations, you know, we forget organizations are built for the people that occupy them at the time they occupy them. And so many organizations today are built to be very comfortable places for white males.
Mhm.
And so here's the kind of life cycle, right? So your 20s, you're out there figuring out who you are and what you want to be. Your 30s, you're sort of sorted into high potentials and everybody else. Your 40s, you're taking the reins of power. Your 50s, you're allowed one Corvette and a blonde. And then your 60s, you're done. You sort of hand over.
Right.
Well, that doesn't work for women. It never has. And
Mhm.
so I'm seeing women building these very interesting careers out of, I'll call them bricolage, right?
Yeah.
So I get an experience here that teaches me this. I get another experience there. And so maybe during the time that I'm doing all that care work, I'm not full on, like I'm not, it's not that I'm not performing, but I'm not, like there's a piece of my brain that's worried about who's going to pick up the black socks for football practice tomorrow. There's that stuff going on in the back of your head. But then once you're past that phase, you've got a long potential career left after that. And I would say even for myself, I mean, it wasn't that I wasn't busy and professional and producing while I was raising my family, but certainly nothing like the level that's, the nest is empty. My husband's doing his thing. He's perfectly happy to do mine. And it just frees up so much capacity. And so I think what we're going to need to think about is not careers as ladders, but career as much more lattices. And I think that actually stands to potentially really benefit women.
That you just blew my mind. That's so interesting. I've never really even thought about, the cycle. And it's, as you were talking about it, I was just thinking that's 100% what I've been conditioned to, equate success to. And you have these, arbitrary time markers that are just not meant or are not sometimes compatible with what you as a woman, may have to go through. So I think that is absolutely fascinating.
Well, yeah, and I think we're very hard on ourselves too, as women, and everything's got to be perfect and everything's got to be gorgeous. And any high-powered woman who's had a family will tell you it's a fantasy. I mean, the days I've gotten off a plane from Europe and the next thing on my list is going to the grocery store because there's nothing in the house, right? I mean, that's not glamorous and people don't talk about it. And I think also women don't do a great job of picking their battles, right? I mean, there are things like, for example, I enjoy cooking, but that is not a burden to me because I really enjoy it. I have a friend who's a very successful go-getter. Like, I think the last thing she cooked was maybe a chicken nugget, like 15 years ago. It's because that's not where she's chosen to enjoy. For me, cooking is relaxing. And, when you work with ideas all day long and you make something and it's nice, that's great. And if it's awful, you throw it in the trash, but at least you have a tangible product.
Right.
And so I think we need to be better at really deciding, what are the things that we take great pride in. And then, there's lots of other ways to get the rest that you really don't enjoy doing done.
Absolutely. Take what you need and let the rest go from your plate. That is definitely, I think, something that you hear a lot, but it's very hard to put into practice. I think these are like the reminders, at least for me, that's kind of, good for me to like put on a Post-it, like just, it's okay if you are not, doing all of these things. I think as long as you're doing some of these things and you take pride in those things.
Well, and focus on the outcome, right? What's the outcome that you want to achieve? Because I think we get very, distracted by, whatever it is, I've got to tend to these 15 things today and are any of them really, like if it waits till next week, is the world going to end? No, probably not.
Absolutely.
The other thing I think women need to be smarter about, and I think they are getting smarter about it when I look at my daughter's generation, is this notion of emotional labor. The thinking about, the reminding, the setting up the family calendar, the just sort of keeping the rails running, stuff that a lot of women end up doing, and having that conversation with your partner or your kids or whoever is in your circle about, here are the things we're going to do and here are the things that we're not. And a very interesting example of this was actually Melinda Gates, who realized that even in this like super billionaire household that they live in, everybody would finish dinner and they'd all go off and do their things, and she'd be in the kitchen for another hour and a quarter just doing the last bits and pieces. We all know what that's like, right? You want finishing up glass, you might. And so they made a family rule that said nobody leaves the kitchen until everybody's ready to leave the kitchen.
Wow.
And I thought that was such a simple intervention, and it's not finger pointing or blame or nagging. It's just, let's set some boundaries so that so that she wasn't picking up all this accidental work nobody else was thinking about.
That's incredible. And I think I realized that we're, about 4 minutes out, and I feel like you've just been giving me so much advice. And so I kind of want to keep this train going. would love if you could share, this is something that we ask our guests for Women's Health Tech Wednesdays, you know, what is a piece of career advice that you can share, or maybe something that a career advice that was given to you that you've held on to?
Well, one piece of advice is, go for it. Go for it. I mean, women are known for, if there's 10 qualifications and I only have 8, oh, I couldn't possibly try. Whereas men are like, I got 2, I got this, let's go. So, what's the worst that'll happen? Somebody, will say no, or you're not ready, or give you feedback, which is useful. But at least now they know you're interested, right?
Yeah.
So I would say, don't talk yourself out of taking a chance.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, because I think, there's this idea of it needs to be perfect before it can be presented, like it needs to be completely perfect and polished, and then I'm ready. But I love that, it's just take that shot, and the worst that can happen is the no, which is fine, or the feedback, which is even better. So I think.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example of this. Years ago, I ran this program called Women in Leadership. And there was a woman who wanted to switch careers from something to something. And the new career was in her professional sweet spot, but in education, which she had never worked in. And so we're giving everybody feedback on an important thing in their lives. And it happened to be the cover letter for this new job. And she writes, first line is, although I have no experience in education, and the rest of the cover letter is all about, how fabulously qualified she was for this job. And I'm like, don't do that.
Yeah. Oh my God. So, you have to be the biggest advocate is yourself for yourself. So I love that. Very, very true. Also wanted to quickly ask you, when it comes to just, healthcare, women's health, what trends are you kind of seeing just in general, through the work that you're doing? Whether that's related to just on the policy side of things or on the technology, organizational side of things. Would just love your take.
Well, I think the fact that we have so many more women in healthcare organizations in more senior roles means that women's issues are actually getting a hearing, which is kind of new. I think we're much more attuned to issues of health equity, of health inequity, and how unfair in many cases our situation is. And of course, we've got the whole abortion debate, which honestly, I thought we were done with that decades ago. And it just seems to me that that's going to bring to the head a lot of other issues involving women's healthcare that perhaps people haven't been dealing with very well at all. And something that I think is important with respect to that nobody is talking about. Nobody anywhere is, almost every state has a legal obligation that if you are the parent of a child, that you owe child support for that child for its life until it is 21.
Wow.
And the thing that never made this an issue before was we could not really identify true paternity, right? So so it was always kind of, men kind of got away with it. That has changed.
Absolutely.
So I think we're going to be having some absolutely fascinating debates about once people realize, because nobody's aware of it. People don't understand that.
Yeah, I think it's, the situation has completely changed. And I think with all of that, I'm also very curious to see how this is all going to shake out. But I definitely agree with you when it comes to just, I think it's really shining a spotlight on just all of the broader, healthcare access issues, women's health education issues in general, like just health literacy, because there's a really big gap when it comes to that. And, contraception is just one, but there's so many conditions in which we're just not aware, and we don't know how to really advocate for ourselves because of that.
And one of the projects, one of the things I would observe is a lot of the big companies in healthcare are actually taking the diversity agenda super seriously. So one that I'm working with right now is Genentech, and they have made a huge corporate commitment in partnership with Columbia to really increase the diversity of their most senior executive ranks. So I'm working very closely with this chosen group of leaders who are, it's an executive education program. It's not like a diversity program, but the population is diverse. And that's a commitment you didn't see even 15 years ago. So I think that's going to help as well.
Absolutely. A step in the right direction, which we love to see. That's incredible. Well, I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to chat. I know we're a little bit over, but you have been just a wealth of support and information. So really wanted to thank you again, Rita, for just sharing your words of wisdom with us during our 30 minutes together.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And please do reach out. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to be responsive.
Absolutely. We love that. Thank you so much. And everyone, please be sure to check out our next session on Wednesday with Lisa White. The registration information is all available in the chat. Also, really wanted to thank our sponsors, Goodwin and Witham, and give one last huge shout out to Rita McGrath for just all that she had to share with us today and for taking the time to chat. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yes,
We'll talk soon.
Yep, we'll talk soon. See everyone next Wednesday.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.